Hooray! Good to see you. We're so sorry for the delay. It is lovely to have you here for a fireside chat with the wonderful Brian Holt. I am so honored. I am so honored to have Brian in this fireside chat. Brian has been a partner, I would even say mentor for nigh on 10 years and was the first Frontendmasters instructor that I ever got to watch, and also the first instructor who really inspired me to think about how to teach in a way that gave people autonomy over their ideas. Since then, Brian, at that point, I think Brian was a Netflix senior engineer. Before that, Brian was a senior engineer at Reddit, building out their marketplace product, building out their UI, then at Netflix again. Then Brian's moved into technical product and program leadership at Microsoft. It's almost hard to keep track of all of them at Snowflake. It's like I want to get some great clips of Brian describing how to get into every single exciting company in the given moment. And now Brian runs product at SQLite Cloud. So continuing from day one, I think a commitment to open source community, to teaching, to mentorship, to giving back. I think it is kind of fun, given it is so badass. And I really want to dig into it with Brian, to shout out and give a round of applause for Brian completing their MBA, which is incredible, in Seattle, I think, and also an amazing achievement. Having almost dropped out of my own master's twice, especially as an adult, it's almost impossible to push through. So it's incredible achievement. So I'm just very lucky to have Brian alongside me. I'm sure many of you know Brian from Frontendmasters, the most loved courses, the 8-part series on React. We're just very, very lucky. So Brian, welcome. Delight to have you.
Oh, thanks, Will. I mean, I'm just stoked to be here. Like you said, we've been friends for probably a decade or longer at this point. I mean, I've flown down to Los Angeles to hang out with you. I've flown over to New York to hang out with you. We have quite a storied history together, and I mean, just nothing but lovely things to say about you, Will. I'm super, super stoked to be here with you.
It's wonderful, and I think everyone can agree Brian's background is outstanding. Name literally in lights, setting a benchmark for what a good fireside chat should look like.
It requires a certain amount of vanity. I'll put it that way.
No, it's beautiful. We did get a custom LED, beautiful Codesmith sign ready for the New York office right before we closed the New York office. So there we go. Awesome. Start on a positive note. Okay, I guess there's so many things we can cover. Why don't we start, if it's okay, I think maybe actually, honestly, if you can remember, because it'd be really interesting to me, to start with let's start with something which we both equally kind of relate to, which is this idea of teaching, explaining topics, how one goes about it, and kind of how you first got into it. I want to really get into the engineering side as well, but just because it's something that it was how I first really came across you, it's probably how many people in this room did first come across you. I will share that I first watched a talk you gave on which tell me if I'm misremembering this, but because I can't find it, maybe it got it's a while back. But approaching building a similar app with different frameworks. Yep. You did write that talk, right?
I did.
Yeah, that was and it was absolutely transformative for me. I can't find it anywhere, so I was like,
it's there. You just gotta look for it.
Okay, but it was absolutely transformative for me. If I remember right, it was possibly Angular, React, and maybe like a Backbone or something like that, maybe an Ember. I can't.
Yep.
But it would have been 2014, I think, and it was absolutely 2015, maybe absolutely profound. It gave me an under the hood framework. We try to talk about Codesmith being a place you don't become a React technician. You may become a specialist, but you ultimately, ideally, develop the underlying principles. And it's what I try and do in my hard parts of JavaScript or UI or whatever that guide the implementation in given frameworks. It felt like you were doing the same thing by giving people that comparative map it gives people that. Well, so how did that come about? Where did you even think of that idea? I'll be honest, I've not seen it anywhere else since, and yet I thought it was profound. So yeah, how did that even come about? How did you get into that path?
I wrote that when I was at Reddit, and the long story short on how I got that gig to teach that for the very first time is I gave a 5-minute talk at FluentConf 2013. I thought I did terrible. The video's out on YouTube if you want to see Brian shaking during his very first talk. And I thought I bombed it. And one of the organizers, it was Simon St. Laurent and Peter Cooper, came over to me and said, like, that was awesome. We want you to come back next year and do something longer. And
Fellow British, by the way, Peter. Very nice.
Yeah, no, lovely. Cooper Press, awesome stuff. And then Simon runs content at LinkedIn Learning now.
Wow.
So they invited me back. They slated me for a 90-minute workshop on just what you're talking about, comparing frameworks. And I did, at that time, it was just 3. And I want to say it was Angular, Ember, and Backbone, and that might be it during that 90-minute slot. I wrote that because I was at Reddit and we didn't have a framework of choice. Everything was just Django generated templates and some jQuery. And I was like, I think we can do this better and faster. And so I basically did that for myself. And I was like, I think this is a useful tool for people to think about this and like where these are, are great and where they fall apart. And so I kind of turned those learnings into a workshop. And presented that at Fluent 2014. I think that sounds right. It's in that area, which is actually where I met Mark Grabansky the first time, the CEO of Frontendmasters. He's like, hey, that was pretty okay. Do you want to come teach us for Frontendmasters? I was like, that sounds fun. Yeah, sure, absolutely. Honestly, I just thought I was getting a free trip to Minneapolis. I was like, I'd want to go there. I've never been there before.
Yeah.
And I mean, it totally changed my life. Right? Like I now, like, those guys are my best friends, and those fine folks at Frontendmasters. I met you. I met a bunch of lovely people from it. It raised my profile in such a way that I was able to kind of go and advance my career. But yeah, it really just started with, like, I was just trying to figure out, like, what's the best thing to build with.
Yeah, and I will be honest, by the way, I also spoke at Fluent.js in a year or two after that, one of those 5-minute talks as well. And you can also find that video of me where people have since said, wow, you seem so different. I'm like, I thought I was okay. I did not get invited back for any 90-minute talk. I will say, I think you, similarly with Mark, so for folk on the stream, Mark is the creator, CEO of Frontendmasters, along with Brent and others in the wonderful community there, a wonderful team. And I still don't know how Mark decided to give me a shot on there, except that I know that you were the person who advocated for me. And I still don't quite know why, but I'm eternally grateful for that. So then maybe let's talk a bit about that shift into Frontendmasters and how you started to think about, because I think we got a lot of people here on from Frontendmasters. I want to dig into Reddit. I want to dig into how we think about where software engineering is going, but just give a bit more history. Tell us a bit about, and maybe we can kind of bounce back and forwards a bit on how you go about building your talks. I think it's fair to say for people on the stream, Brian's talks, I think, are the #1 most popular talks on Frontendmasters, super loved. What's your process? I can share just briefly mine for a second. Like for me, I give the talks live to people, and I'm incredibly grateful to the people who sit through those bloody talks when they're not very polished. Some of them, and we were just actually talking about, I don't know if we can share this, but like some of them, one of them particularly was an absolute godsend to me, and she would go to every single one of them. And if ever I was sort of 3 hours in and most people couldn't hold what was going on in their head, my job is to try and get to where they can. So it's got to be removing the stuff that's not necessary and adding all the foundational pieces that are, but she could follow even when it wasn't at that point. And it's funny, she's actually now being connected to you, and I know there's a promising stuff going on there. But like, that's my process, and it's painful for everybody involved watching. What's your process?
Yeah. Well, I'll say one of the reasons I recommended you so strongly, Will, is you, and I think it's okay for me to loop myself into this kind of, you don't really care about puffing up your ego, which a lot of teachers do, that you're just there to make sure that that person walks away knowing what you're trying to teach them. And that's rarer than you think. There's a bunch of people out there that are up there to show what they know. And I think it's that level of humility that I like recognized in you, that I value in myself. That I was like, this person should go far when it comes to teaching. So that is the core tenet that I hold like most high when I'm trying to prepare these courses, is like, I don't care if I show off I'm an idiot. I don't care if I come off like an idiot, because I am an idiot, and I'm super okay with that. I think it's actually a superpower, right?
I want to be really clear. You're actually legitimate. I'm the real deal idiot when it comes to coding stuff.
Look, I'll fight you. So my process has kind of been refined over the years now. I'm much more streamlined when I write my courses now, because I counted last time I did my last Frontendmasters. I've taught there now 29 courses, which is wild to say out loud.
Wow.
The thing that I always do is I just start with a really strong outline of like, here's all the concepts that I want to get from zero to brought across. I then try and organize that into narratives. Basically, like, you learn this, then you learn this, then you learn this. I really don't like hand waving, like, ever, where I just say like, well, just trust me that this is the case. It's not always totally possible, because sometimes you have like 5 foundational concepts that then build onto something, and you have to cover all of them, and they're interdependent. But I always make sure that I loop back around, make sure that I'm not hand waving over any of it.
Hand waving is one of the, we talk a lot about this at Codesmith, with this idea of technical communication. And some of these things get kind of, what's the word? They get kind of, paraded out, like they become quite trite. If you can't explain it, you don't understand it kind of thing. I think any of those things, what I just acknowledge is, and I don't blame one for not. Like, it's incredibly hard, and it involves people like, the person I was mentioning earlier, Pasna, sitting in the audience, helping you understand that you aren't explaining it, because you don't fully often understand it yourself. So It's a very it's easy to say, oh, if you can't explain it to somebody else and you don't really understand it, but actually I really pitched like that trite statement includes within it, because it's overused, because it's incredibly hard to explain stuff, and that doesn't put it all on you. It's incredibly hard for people bloody listening to put up with you figuring out how to explain it. So just to acknowledge that,
Absolutely. It does take a certain amount of humility to like look at things that you know and realize that like you don't really understand all of it either, right? Again, once you start teaching enough of these classes, you kind of have like a student in the back of your mind, and like you start writing something down. It's like, I know someone's going to ask me this question, and I realize I don't know the answer to this question, so I'm going to go find the answer to this question because I know it's going to get asked, right?
Worst thing is, that's the bit, by the way, that is almost always the crux. The bit that you can't quite work out is almost always the bloody crux of it, and that creates this obligation. You have to bloody figure it out, and hand waving so often is really about. And again, I don't blame the person. It sounds like it's there in the wrong. No, hand waving is, the bloody reality of not having the time to figure it all out. But that is the real job, is to try to get that hand waving removed.
Yeah, totally. And I'm a big first principles kind of teacher. I believe that people embrace complexity if they understand what it solves for them. And this is why I teach my React course in such a way, like we start with no build step, which no one ever builds React that way, right? And then we go through, we build everything without a build step. And I was like, okay, this is way too hard and pointless to do it this way. Let's introduce the build step now, so that you get beyond. It's like, you now understand what this was solving for you. And then you start to embrace the tools, and you start to be grateful for your tools, rather than it's like, oh, Webpack broke again. I effing hate Webpack, right? But if you understand what Webpack's doing for you, it's like, oh, okay, you have a bit more patience for it. You have a bit more love for the tool. And so I always try and make sure that people have that kind of foundational knowledge. Containers is another good version of this, where like I teach people how to build containers by hand first before you even touch Docker, right? Because at that point, like, you start to love what Docker does for you, because you see, like, I could do this, I don't want to, right?
I think that Codesmith still, I'm not 100% sure of this, we certainly used to, no, we certainly do. Again, it's an example just like you're describing. You build with Node first, and then Express or some other middleware tool or some other framework sits as a solution, not as it's the default. And I think it points to me to a deeper sense that we sometimes look at programming and or software and or computer stuff as being put together. And I think possibly it is put together by, sometimes it's like discovered truths. Whereas in fact, so much of it was designed in the first place by somebody to solve their own, problem of dealing with the vast complexity of a computer and to make it more intuitive. And we don't always think about it that way. That, to me, like you're describing, is a fundamental way to think about it. I just ask you, where does that, you might want to call it empathy, where does that come from for you? Where's your sense of, you now work often in product side of things. That's in theory, a very user-driven empathy area. I would argue a great software engineer is a software engineer empathy-driven, empathy for not just users, but for developers and for all partners in the process. But where's that come from for you? Like, what's your journey? What's it been about your journey that's given you that relatively distinctive? I think it is all over the place, but where's it come from for you, that perspective?
I mean, that's a great question. I love building things that people love and people use. That's kind of been a foundational tenet. I have a good anecdote of what really instilled this into me. Netflix has an on-premise user testing lab, and so we'd have people come through, try out our products, see what worked well, what didn't work well. And the very first time that it was my feature, got to go through the entire process with 15 users, I just saw I built this beautiful, wonderful technological piece of software that was well tested. It had types. It had, it was very small, so it loaded quickly. I remember it was the first time I had ever shipped Redux. I was really proud of that. And then I went through it and I saw people just didn't get it. They didn't understand how the thing flowed. It performed way worse than our existing sign-up flow. And I just had this kind of light bulb moment of oh my God, I'm so wrong about this, right? I focused on all of the wrong reasons. I was focusing on this, building this technologically superior piece of software, when in reality, a crappy piece of software that actually fit users' needs would have been 100 times better, right? And that was a big moment, at least for me, when I realized it's really fun to be wrong in these particular cases. And so I think it comes from this sense of just humility of I don't care if I'm wrong. I just want to build useful stuff, right? And so going on there, please tell me I'm wrong, tell me I'm stupid, tell me I'm an idiot, because I'm learning and I get to go do the right thing after that. That's really where a lot of that comes from.
And that's running an organization, and I think in the sense the same for you, but running Codesmith has been, I love, I don't know. I'm not saying I think it's hard to say that I love all the learning, and it means I get things plain up badly wrong at different times, but I wouldn't say I'm somebody. I find it hard to believe that I'm somebody who's. Whereas I look at yourself and I think there's somebody there who maybe truly embraces being wrong. I'm not sure I embrace being wrong, but at the very least, I can feel instrumentally that that learning is profoundly rewarding to like I like discovering that how I approached that thing previously. I love seeing having revealed to me new approaches by team members where I'm like, oh wow, I didn't know that we could do it that well. Like I didn't know that quality of person existed. That just is really satisfying. I was actually talking to a lawyer in their 70s, late 70s, and watching the way they could read and interpret every last thing. And I do sometimes worry a little bit in our field that there is a bit of a over celebration of that earlier stage. And I loved seeing a lawyer. I hope that we will continue to feel, damn, there's new insights, new growth, new value, and not look at people who are kind of further down their career and go, why are they still doing this?
Right.
Because in other fields, it's celebrated, and you look at somebody it was very rewarding to see somebody in their 70s, who was more of an expert. And I sometimes don't know if we give that same credit in our space, but hopefully we do. Okay, shall we talk then about, I think there's more uncover on the teaching side, but shall we talk a bit about, I'd love to just dive into some of the companies that you've worked at and some of the anecdotes and memories you have where you're allowed to kind of speak to it. Let's start with Reddit. When you were there, did you have any idea that it would become kind of the lasting platform now online where you can perhaps, you append Reddit on your search kind of thing? Did you have any idea? I might create my account is 17, 18 years old.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't use it for the last 16 years. Did you have any idea when you were there, because you must have been there early days, that you were building something that's become kind of the lasting source of trouble and toxicity, but also some really good communities? Did you have any idea when you were building it?
So I had kind of a weird situation because I was employee number 29, right? So I was really early, but it was also 8 years old at when I joined. Because they had started it, they had sold it to Condé Nast, they went internal to Condé Nast. Condé Nast didn't do very much with it, and then they spun it back out. And at that point, they're kind of like, maybe we should hire some more people and see if we can, make some other.
So it was fully spun back out. I must admit, I didn't always fully understand exactly how the Condé Nast relationship worked.
Yeah, no, I think the original hope, and don't necessarily quote me on that, I'm not super sure, but They were hoping that Condé Nast could have ad sales across all of their properties, and they quickly realized whoever's advertising in Vogue does not necessarily want to advertise on Reddit, and there wasn't a lot of overlap there. So at that point, they're like, well, you're not useful to us, so here, go back out in the world. So did I have I had a good, we had the Obama AMA fairly soon after I had joined, which was, if it's not still, the biggest event in Reddit's history. So it was big. I mean, we had billions of page views per employee, which is wild to say out loud as well, right?
Wow.
So I had some idea that this was going to be big, but do I think it was going to turn into what it is today? No.
I was just checking. It's a 10 billion market cap company, and I don't think it's stopping there. It's barely begun on monetization for where it can get to.
Oh, absolutely. Makes good choices. They're still figuring out all their ad strategy. They're starting to spin up that new revenue stream of AI training and stuff like that, because it's the best corpus for stuff like that as well. Yeah, no, I'm
well. If you want your chatbot to permanently recommend that, what is it? How do you keep the pizza? The cheese on the pizza? Bit of glue.
That's funny. Yeah.
Were there any choices you made? Again, it's a while back now. What years were you there? 2006, 2008, or a bit later?
2012 to 2014.
Okay. So were there any choices you made at that point that you remember that were kind of investments in, sustainability of the code base, and or any choices you made that came back to bite you looked at the IPO document, you're like, that was
that guy.
was,
I would say the most consequential decision that I made at Reddit was deciding to use React way before anyone thought it was a good idea. I have a tweet out there somewhere. It's like 2013 or 2014 of like, hey, we shipped Reddit's first React code. And there was a bunch of people saying like, wow, that's bold. Like, why'd you do that?
When we added to the curriculum in 2015, it was still boldish. I remember that, NFL in LA started using React.
Yep.
And I mean, the team would come down and kind of present. The React team would come down and present to them every bloody week because they were trying to get traction. So the fact you were doing that, as you say, 2013, that was remarkable.
Yeah. I mean, I gave React a shot when Pete Hunt presented it at, I think that was one of the JS comps. And I was like, I don't think this is for me. But then we hired an engineer from Friendster, Rich, that was like, no, you should give this another shot. And so we rebuilt a good part of our site in React. And the moment where I realized like this thing has like serious legs is I went on a vacation. I was on a cruise, and something broke because I wrote it, right? And it was over a weekend. And our backend developer was able to hop in and fix it. It's like, yeah, no, it was very obvious what your code was doing, and I read it and I fixed it, and that was that. And I was like, this is okay. We should do more with this because everything else was written in Angular 1 of some like 1.2 or something like that. And all the back-end developers just like, we won't touch this. This is too hard for us to wrap our minds around. That's probably more of an indictment on how I was writing Angular than on Angular itself. But React at that time was definitely forcing us into a good patterns, and like it democratized our code base a little bit more. Like we got more contributions from other engineers.
I mean, that's profound looking back. We sort of take it for granted now, and obviously now, and I'd be curious to hear your, I don't know, I was going to say, I'd be curious to hear your view of where frameworks are moving, but not so much in a kind of name this framework, name that framework, but where are frameworks more holistically moving. But it was profound at that point, as you say. Before that, a mixture of templating plus jQuery and or extensions of that. The shift to what you see in the code mirroring what you get, at least some degree structurally on the page, but with dynamic content, seems to be now very intuitive. But at the time, and of course, took some engineering innovations to make it possible, was profound and transformative. But let's just segue for a second. I would love to come back to Netflix, to Microsoft, but actually, while we're talking about frameworks, do you have a sense of holistically, and maybe you're not honestly all that interested in the question, because maybe it is a secondary question, right? You know what I mean? That's kind of like, maybe it's a secondary question at this point, but do you have a sense of, but that might be the insight. Do you have a sense of where frameworks, at least especially for thinking about UI, are going? Is it a secondary question to browsers? Is it a secondary question to, I guess to some extent, is it a secondary question to the code that's generating it being more natural language or whatever? Where's your mindset for particularly UI frameworks going?
Sure. I mean, it's still React versus everything else, just in terms of adoption and mind share. The thing that I see happening, which I see both the good and the bad side, so I'm not passing judgment on this. I'm just saying that this is what I see happening. Is we spent the last, I don't know, my entire career basically kind of democratizing front-end web development. We made it much easier and the barrier to entry much lower, where, like I said, we got engineers from all over contributing. We have new developers coming to the field learning stuff like React and Vue and all the other awesome frameworks that are out there. And they did a really good job of solving the 95% use case for like all sorts of UI problems. And I'm seeing in the past, let's go 3 years, a big focus onto these like much more advanced use cases. I'm going to call them like the Facebook use case or the Netflix use case, like where you have a team of 1,000 engineers and you're trying to eke out an extra 500 milliseconds of performance, or some advanced use case that like, you know, my 11-person startup does not have or need, right?
Right.
And I think that's great for them. It's technologically interesting. And I think for the senior engineers that are along for the ride, I think it's good for them as well. But I do mourn a little bit that we are adding complexity back onto this, and we're making a lot of these things less approachable. Like, I love Next. I love building things with Next. Next is much more difficult to use than just, you know, your typical getting started React experience was with, you know, create class all those years ago.
Right, but is that more because it doesn't have a Brian Holt course, perhaps, or does it?
I'm going back to teach React again, so
yeah.
no.
By the way, our fellow Frontendmasters teacher, Richard Feldman, I believe Richard teaches Elmon, is in the audience.
Hi, Richard. I love Richard. We had an amazing time in Tel Aviv. Anyway,
Wow.
amazing guy.
That's amazing. That's brilliant. That's it's a whole community. It's a whole collection of people, and all from different walks of life.
Along those lines, definitely keep an eye on what's going to happen with Angular and Quick. Not Quick. What's the name of their interior? Wiz is the name of the interior one. So another Frontendmasters instructor, Sarah Drasner, is now in charge of both of those frameworks. And I think wisely has decided to merge those two frameworks into one. And I know Wiz is not available outside of Google, but they're incorporating a lot of those ideas into Angular. And I think that's just going to make it better. And plus, it's Sarah. Whatever Sarah touches turns to gold, right?
I was going to say it is increasingly the Frontendmasters. I know it's not a nice way of putting it. The Frontendmasters mafia running these big the cabal, exactly. But no, the supportive community of leaders. Okay, let's hit some kind of, I think, high value stuff for people where I think people will be really interested in your take. Sorry, I'm playing my Lego. People really interested in your take, which are, okay, we're in an era where it can feel like, and you know, this is a provocative take, and I have, of course, my whole views on this, but it can feel like some of the excitement around, let's say, building UIs is secondary to the mega shifts going on. So those might be the rise of new tooling. It might be the rise of what I call productized prediction, which is integrating prediction into your application. Think, you know, AI integration into your application, but it also might be, and we're doing a talk on that on Frontendmasters in a few months, myself and another person at Codesmith. But that creates a kind of gloss and excitement around a particular domain, and maybe a fear in software engineers. And maybe this is the wrong way to frame it. So, but rather just straight up, in this era where you have some mega trends going on, one, rise of AI, broadly integrating new pieces in the stack, let's say prediction, but also co-pilots and GPT, to ChatGPT and whatever. Two, you have, I think, the rise of whole new industries that have never before been fully touched by software on some of their core areas. So, you know, think of things like law. Like, we have a graduate, and she just took a job as software engineer, legal prompter, requiring 2 years of back-end experience in Python, and that she had a JD, that she had a law degree.
Wow.
You know, these are mega trends, right?
Yeah.
It's like wild to me. And then add in, like, which I'm not so, you know, aware of the ins and outs of, but the software layer becoming the layer in which problem solving is happening in everything from robotics to construction to telecoms, all of which much of the kind of reasoning and creativity is happening, not creativity alone, but happening in the software layer. So if you see, you know, groundbreaking robotics work, a lot of the work is done in simulation in the software layer. So what does a software engineer look like in this era, in your take?
Everyone, I think is the answer to your question. I think there's a lot of things to touch on there, but like I think kind of to your point is that as we go forward, everyone's going to have some amount of access, right? I mean, that's kind of always been the theme of computing over time, like way back when it was just assembly, and you need these like, math wizard nerds essentially to move registries around, right? Like I'm not there. If that's what software engineering was today, I wouldn't be one. I'd be something else, right?
Right.
But then we had C, and that made that available to more people. Then we had Java. Then we had JavaScript. And obviously, I'm not getting that timeline here correct, but you kind of see my point here is that we're getting higher and higher here in the stack of abstraction, right? And I think this is just the next level of abstraction. We're going to have basically like natural language kind of programming abilities. I don't know what that's necessarily going to look like, but it's giving more access to more people, and that can be scary for us as entrenched developers, because it does commodify a little bit what we do. I do think that like over the next career worth, like I don't know, so 50 years or something like that programming is going to become more of a trade school kind of job rather than a 4-year degree kind of job. Or something like Codesmith is perfectly situated to usher along and help along that new generation of coders. But it's going to be the accountant that not only needs to know how to work Excel, they also need to be able to know how to like kind of interface with it in some that kind of more programmatic way.
Yeah.
And I see that being the C trend going forward. I don't think it's going to eliminate too many jobs. I think it's going to change a lot of jobs. But I mean, the way that I tell people to think about AI is it's just the world's fastest, most mediocre intern, right? And if you give a fast, mediocre intern bad input, they're going to give you bad output. And if you give them good input, they're still probably going to give you some questionable output that you still need to like be the person in charge there. And over time, at least LLMs in particular, they're going to get bigger, better, faster, more parameters, all that kind of stuff. But I think we are reaching a logical maxima there of this is about as good as it's going to get until the next revolution comes, which is going to be something like quantum computing or a new algorithm that's more quote unquote sentient or something like that.
I mean, that's fascinating. Sentient meaning maybe even with intention becomes very interesting. One of the things I, wrestle with though is so much. Again, Brandy Richardson, who's an alum, who's technical program manager at Microsoft, just moved to Google. She was describing, the cliche of 10% of the time spent writing code, 90% figuring out why it's not working, which sounds silly, but actually, figuring out why it's not working is the problem solving. And I think, as you described there, understanding, when I post roles for engineering positions, the biggest thing I'm like, I don't even always understand what I need.
Right.
And that runs from the principal engineer to the CTO to the product lead, and the need you have to understand the scope of what's possible in order to be able to define what you even need is kind of profound. So I guess one of the things I push a lot is this idea of, or we push a lot at Codesmith, is this idea of technical communication, the ability to get your mental model of a concept into the brain of another person, where that requires you to understand the input factors of what they currently know, in order to be able to, glob it on to what they already know. Very much like being, a teacher on Frontendmasters, right? What does that mean to you? Like, what does technical communication mean to you? And now, and different stages now as a VP of product, what is that ability to get your mental model or someone else to get their mental model of this system of people or code or whatever into the head of somebody else?
Yeah. I mean, in my undergrad, before I dropped out, so maybe take everything I would say with a grain of salt. Really the only class that I reference a lot is my technical writing class, which was a technical communications class. I hated it at the time. It was a ton of writing. It was very dry. It was very boring. and it turns out to be extremely useful to me today, 15 years later, or something like that. I have a course on Frontendmasters called The Complete Intro to PM, or Product Management. But it's basically just a course in technical communication. It talks a lot about, like, here's how to write docs, here's how to come across get your point out, right? Here's how to back those points up. A lot of it's counterintuitive for those of us, at least, that came through the American education system, because we're taught how to write essays and articles and, like, kind of more like journalistic approach to things, which is not how you write for companies and for technical communication, right? You're not trying to entertain, you're not trying to hold people's attention necessarily in the sense of, like, thrilling them or something like that, as you would with, like, a piece of fiction or something like that. It's much more, how can I get this person from wherever they are to wherever I need them to be in the shortest amount of time possible, so that when I have the highest possibility that they'll actually read what I'm writing to them.
Right.
And also, to try and arrive at the correct decision, because maybe you don't have all the answers and you're trying to elicit a response back from them, right?
I was doing an AMA on Reddit last week, and someone asked me, I want to write, I've got a guide how to write talks or content, but it doesn't look very pretty. But I wrote briefly, it's like, everything you need to know, the goal of technical communication, everything you need to know and absolutely nothing you don't. But bloody hell, working out what that is, that's a whole thing.
Right.
So,
especially across a whole audience, right? Because different people need different things too.
Yeah, absolutely. How did that evolve as you went through your career? What did the path you took look like from Reddit, where you actively made the choice of using React and implemented, Netflix, where you clearly did very much the same, and then as you moved towards Microsoft and you started to lean more towards strategy, and like, what was that trajectory like?
Yeah, man, I learned so much in 2 years when I worked at Reddit, because I was everything, right? I was on sales calls, I did the design work, I did operations, I learned how to use AWS at that point. Like, it was absolute trial by fire. I'm so grateful for my time there. Like, all my best friends are still from that era, right? But I also got very burned out. I worked way too much. But kind of a trial by fire, and then I went to Netflix.
That's really rough looking back as well, I imagine. Like, do you know regrets, or how would you look at that now?
People, this is always a hard one for me to say, because I needed to do it, right? I wouldn't be where I am today if I hadn't engaged so deeply with my work back then. And I was pumped about it, right? No one was making me, like, over my shoulder saying, Brian, you got to do this. I was so enthusiastic about what I was doing that, like, I was working at 10 o'clock on, weekends, but I was pumped about it. So
you were because I can relate to being on Reddit at 10 o'clock on the weekends, but you were building.
I was sleeping code at the weird hours of the day. Yeah. My advice for people in those kind of situations is, like, just have, like, an honest conversation with yourself about what you're putting into it and what you're getting out of it. I was putting everything into it, but I got everything out of it. Right. And don't let people take advantage of you. No one was taking advantage of me. No one made me do it. I chose to. I did go too far. I got really burned out for a little bit, but luckily Reddit basically said, like, yeah, we can see that you put a lot into this, and they gave me a whole month off to get my shit together.
Wow.
And come back. Right.
Wow, that's incredible. So you went from Reddit. How did that shift into leadership? And talk about what you had to grow in. You've done now also an MBA, and it, to me, speaks to potentially, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but the value of the intersection, bringing together these different mentalities, disciplines, domains into your roles. But yet, how did that evolve as you went into further and further leadership, the things that you needed to bring to the table?
My mom has a fun saying that she says that she's a cook, not a chef. And that's kind of how I feel about my career. That, like, I'm really good at being productive, getting a lot of stuff done, but I'm not the Michelin star chef in the kitchen here that's deciding these beautiful large architectures. I'm just getting stuff done and out. And I recognize that like my actual, I think, interesting power here that I have that might be different from some other folks is that I am a pretty good technical communicator, and I do think a lot about these things about strategically. And that just kind of became more and more apparent to me as I went through Netflix, and I did work with some of like the Michelin star chefs of the world, like the Jafar Husseins of the world, right? And another Frontendmasters instructor.
Yeah, and also another person who came to speak at Codesmith, and yeah, fantastic.
Yeah. I used to ride the bus with him to Netflix every morning, and he would just melt my mind with the coolest stuff. Like I just loved it. I felt like I was a kid being like in school, right? It was amazing. And he was just so animated and excited about observables. And I was like, I'm so excited that you're excited about this, right?
Beautiful.
So, yeah, I kind of got into that. I ended up at LinkedIn for about 6 months. And I was kind of unsatisfied with what I was working on. LinkedIn's great company, but I just, the corner of it that I was in, I just wasn't very happy. And so I was going to go join a startup. That's when Sarah Drasner reached out to me and said, like, hey, do you want to come try developer relations? And I was like, I think this would be good for me. I think this would kind of stretch me in a new direction. And so it wasn't necessarily some sort of concerted ideas like I'm going to go do this. It was just Sarah finding me on the right day. And that brought me here to Seattle. That brought me to Microsoft proper, because LinkedIn was owned by Microsoft at that point.
Right.
And it made me really hone in my technical communication skills, because that's what I was doing for Microsoft. I was out there trying to explain to developers, this is the, how you augment your abilities using Microsoft's, technologies.
And it was VS Code. Were you
not yet? On? That's where I ended up. So after about 2 years of that, it was so much fun, so much traveling. In 2018, I took 97 flights. Like 140 days, 130 days in hotel rooms or something like that. It was amazing, but it was, I never want to do it again, right? That's when I saw a job posting for program manager on VS Code. I didn't really think too much about being a PM. I just was like, VS Code's amazing and I want to go do that. And then I met with Amanda Silver, who's the VP at the time, and Chris Diaz, the two that run that area of Microsoft. I was so impressed with them and their vision for it that I ended up signing on to, and I learned to become a PM kind of on the job while I was, helping out with VS Code and Microsoft Azure and JavaScript and stuff like
that. Phenomenal. And I do think I had a professor who I saw from my college a few weeks ago, and he said, sometimes you do need to, and it's not the same here, but he said every 10 years you have to kind of start again. And what's magical, though, maybe 5 years or whatever, is that the things you bring from the previous 5 years lead to this acceleration within that domain. And I can only imagine combining up, sure, the product pure aspect with the technology, with the dev storytelling, positioned you for the role you're currently in. Evangelizing a developer product, leading the vision on terms of implementing a
and like what was really fun is I got to work with a bunch of people that maybe are more pure PMs. I don't know how to say it, but like they had been PMs their whole careers, right? And I got to learn from like them their styles of communication, how they write docs, and get people to like, how do they move organizations? Because that was not a skill that I had at the time, right? I knew how to write code and I knew what developers liked, but I didn't know how to change Microsoft, right? And I was likely to get, some good mentorship on how to move organizations when I was at Microsoft.
That's amazing. We got some questions in the chat. I know we're getting to the very, very end. I want to ask a few questions. One, tech market is suffering from paradox of choice. Overabundance of qualified engineering applicants to job posts makes hiring paradoxically harder. Why is that? And are there any standout places where you might be able to find top quality engineers? And we will start recording now. No. But sincerely, what's going on, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the first piece of advice that I have for people in this is ignore everyone's advice, is because everything that I'm going to tell you that Will's going to tell you that people online are going to tell you it's all steeped in survivorship bias. When we came out in the industry, it was a way different place. I came out like in a weird year where there was not enough junior engineers. So they were just slinging junior engineer jobs left and right. And like, it's so dumb to admit that out loud, right? But that was me, right? That's how I got a job. So we have this glut of amazing set of people that are ready to seize opportunities in front of them. And I don't know if there's not enough jobs to go around, but certainly they're having a hard time finding them.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing I can tell you that I think will work the best is that it's the networking part of it. And I know everyone says that, but anything that you can do to get in front of connected people and become useful to them it's just going to bode well for you. Like we just hired 2 interns at SQLite Cloud. I didn't post that job publicly. I just emailed Will and said, hey, give me some interesting people to talk to, right? And that's how we're finding people.
There's more of that, isn't it? Let's have one last question here because I am rightly being told we're running out of time. Question for you, Brian, from Adam. Thank you, Adam. Would it be better to do a degree? This is really interesting. Would it be better to do a degree in another discipline other than computer science, then do a boot camp, then have a double discipline to leverage as an engineer? And, you know, I'm a big one for that survivorship bias comment Brian made earlier, that there's nothing like someone who's made a lot of money to say, hey, it's not about making money. So I'm always skeptical of the shutdown, you know, and I'm sure, Brian, having gone and got your degree, you might also be not simplistic on this. But yeah, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it again on the head of like, I can give you some things some high level things of what I see in the field, but like, if you feel like you can do that and you're looking down that pathway and like, yeah, no, I got this. I'm behind you. Like let's do it, right? I think that sounds super cool. I don't think 4 years on computer science is wasted. I still use my data science and algorithms from time to time. There's stuff that you're just going to pick up that you don't necessarily pick up in other places. And probably the most valuable thing that you're going to lack from not doing a CS program is the connection to your fellow students, classmates. I didn't get a lot out of my classmates, but I look at some of my people that I'm in the field with, and like some of them have gotten all of their jobs just because they're at MIT at the right time and they met the right person and they got them the right job, right?
Yep. And it's why it's so important that we continue to invest in the Codesmith alumni community so that it is that kind of, you know, MIT equivalent, obviously.
Yeah, exactly. So there's so many ways to go about this. I've hired people from Princeton that are incredibly impressive. I've hired totally self-taught people that they just taught themselves off of the internet and they had no credentials to show for it. And frankly, the people I hired from Princeton were great too, but the person that I hired that was totally self-taught probably is the best engineer I've ever met. So, I mean,
that's incredible.
There's so many ways to do this journey, and you just kind of have to trust yourself. And it's like, listen to everyone's advice and ignore most of it.
Wise words to end on. Brian, thank you so much. I think everybody's excited for your upcoming React talk, workshop. It is just an honor and a delight, as always. I am excited to hear how the Codesmith alums do with you all at SQLite Cloud. And thank you to all of our folk online who joined. Let's see what the final comments are here. I think Codesmith tells you not to use the term backpack in interviews. Excellent question. All right. Thank you, people. It's been a pleasure. Thank you to Brian. Look out for Brian's new talk on Frontendmasters. I think the workshop itself on the day of recording will be free live streamed. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Super cool. So if you want to get a live version of Brian's latest React workshop, please look out for the live stream of that. And then go share all the great snippets from this workshop, all the learnings you've got, so that the whole world can benefit from Brian's insights. But thank you so much, everybody. And we are over. And